Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A pleasure to speak to you today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Nice shirt. What have you got on your shirt? Spaceships? No.
Alligators or crocodiles? I'm not
Oh,
sure.
brilliant. Maybe we could kick off with a brief introduction. Newsreader season two. Maybe we can set the scene. Where do we find our characters in the action?
Well, yeah, we return with Helen Norval and Dale Jennings, which are by now they're two newsreaders, both of them. Dale has reached the desk, and they are the golden couple of news when we come into the series. So they're an on-screen team, and they're also in an off-screen relationship. But I suppose the relationship in their personal lives is a little bit more complicated than perhaps the world sees. And so, yeah, season two, obviously they're still going to keep covering all of the huge events of that year, but they sort of have to figure out what they're doing in their personal lives. They love each other, but what sort of relationship should they have? And should they get married? And all of those questions they're facing.
Mm. And I mean, I don't. How must it have felt to have this phenomenal reception to season one? But also, I guess with that maybe comes the pressure. Then, where are you going to take it next? So, yeah, how did you feel about the reaction? And did you already know where the story was going to go, or was that something that you had to kind of figure out?
Well, luckily, I did already know because I was in the fortunate position of we started developing the second season at the end of the first when we finished production of it. It being very optimistic and hoping, and I'm really grateful for that because me and the writing team developed all of our ideas and all of the sense of what we wanted to happen, all the new characters and everything. We had them in place, and I think that was fortunate because I was very thrilled that the first season went so well. But sometimes when that happens, you kind of you want to just latch on and not change too much, not introduce new characters, just try and stick with the formula you have. Whereas I feel like we've ended up with a maybe a bolder and second season and more surprising second season because it was just conceived before I knew what the world would think.
And maybe taking a step back, where did you first get the idea for this setting and for the story? Because it does feel like something that I've not watched before, maybe particularly it being set in Australia. So there's also those cultural differences. But sort of zooming in on this media newsroom at this particular moment in time, what was the spark of the idea?
Well, I'm just a complete news junkie and always have been from the 1980s. And I was a child in the 1980s, but my father, he was a doctor in the 1980s and he was an AIDS specialist. And around the era of the show and my childhood was when AIDS was spreading. And because of that, he was often interviewed on the news, much like COVID, when doctors would go on the news and have to sort of explain how the disease worked. He was doing that in the mid 80s for the AIDS epidemic. And as a child, that just makes a really big impression on you. Sometimes the news would send the helicopters to our local oval to pick him up. And then we would watch it in absolute astonishment and then race home and switch on the television. And so, as you can imagine, like as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, that just made me obsessed with the news, and it formed a habit of watching the news that I maintain to this day. So that's where the news obsession comes from, really, and the obsession with this particular era.
Mm. And what's great about the show, I think, is it just sort of works on like so many different levels. I mean, the characters are so engrossing and the personal relationships, but also sort of, zooming out, there's so much social commentary going on there, sort of the racism and sexism and, by, the news stories that they're covering as well. There's a lot that's coming out about, things that happened through history and particularly in this season as well. So is it quite nice to be able to bring all those elements together in this story?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly delving into all those issues is something that's particularly riveting for me. I've tended to work on shows in the past that are more sort of escapist, whereas this really dives into some of the most complicated issues that we face, and particularly this season. We talk about Aboriginal rights, and that's territory that is still so loaded in Australia today, and so hard, even in a contemporary sense, to talk about. So in some ways it's really intimidating, but also I don't know, a great challenge, and it means that you're going out and speaking to really interesting people who are invested in all of those issues, which is also great.
Yeah, and did you have to kind of go back and do a lot of detailed research to kind of bring all these stories to life? How much did you already know? You know, what did that process look like?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I begin the process by literally getting out all the newspapers, well, actually looking at them online and reading them day by day for the entire year, which is really time consuming, but it's just the best way to just get a sense of what was happening in society, what were the issues were. So it begins like that. And then it really is going back into the news archives. I'm very lucky. The network here gives me full access to their news archives, and they've got all of the old camera tapes, like even the raw camera tapes, unedited. And so it's just a lot of sitting down, combing through it all and looking for those really interesting, little morsels of gold, but also just looking for things that would particularly activate something interesting in our characters.
Mm. And what an incredible cast you have. I mean, right at the center of it, Anna and Sam, but the supporting cast as well. And I think they just really seem to nail, the nuances and the humor and the drama. How did you, discover all these different people, and what was it like seeing them bring your story to life?
Well, I mean, I love the cast so much. I mean, obviously, Anna and Sam, it's amazing because they're so good. I mean, they can capture all of the intentions that you had on the page, but then they also bring all these other, complex notes to it as well. With actors of that caliber, they really can take it to a place even beyond what you had imagined. And so, I love all of that. But also I work very closely with the cast when they come in. And this season we've brought in actually a wonderful Irish actor, Rory Fleckburn. And again, I really engaged him in discussions. He plays like a queer variety show host. And we would spend hours, me zooming to him in London, just talking through what sort of role this character could play, what would be the truth of the situation. And so for me, I really like to grow the characters with the cast, and I hope that shows up on screen. I hope that makes them especially vivid.
And the other thing that, obviously, to just really embracing and taking advantage of that 80s setting, the aesthetic. I mean, the opening of the first episode in particular, it just brings it right back in with the dances and the George Michael song. But throughout the series, that's really an integral part of it, and was that kind of a lot of fun to lean into too?
It is. I mean, we try and make sure that we don't overdo it necessarily in going, because you can really go crazy doing 80s, really extremely 80s MTV stylistic flourishes. And certainly that opening number was a time when we thought this is just going to be absolute 80s glitz and we're going to really enjoy it. So we pick our moments. Later on, we managed to get some vintage footage of Kylie Minogue that I delighted in putting in the series. Little 19-year-old Kylie Minogue, still speaking in a very Australian accent. So yeah, that is so much fun, particularly because it is these are my childhood memories. But by and large, we try and make sure that we keep it quite grounded and that it looks like something that might have been made in the 80s, as opposed to something that's a pastiche of the 80s.
I'm almost out of time, but one of the things that really stands out to me as well is there's so much complexity in the characters, and they're all a bit messy, and you sort of don't fall into those traps of they're sort of being the good guys and the bad guys, or the romances are never completely straightforward. These elements of addiction that come out. So everybody's got different layers to their characters. And do you think that's also one of the things that really draws people in and makes all these people very relatable, even though we're going back to a different era?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, we're trying to make sure that all these characters can surprise you. And I love that you say that there's no heroes or villains, because that's how we see it. I mean, you'll always, maybe there will be a character who acts in a really calculated, cutthroat way, but then you'll find a note of humanity with them. And I have to say that's real credit to the director, Emma Freeman, but also to the actors, to Anna and Sam, because and the whole cast, but they are particularly, that no one in this cast is concerned about their character being likable or anything like that. They just really want everything to be complex and truthful. And I feel like there's a spirit on the show of everyone's just trying to mine the story and the characters for the most sort of complex emotional territory.
And ultimately, what do you think people can take away, and particularly from this next season? It does just feel like, you've upped the ante. It's really edge of your seat stuff. But like we said, lots of these other issues that can strike a chord with people, and whether it's about elections, or, as you said, the Aboriginal vote that you had recently. There's a lot that can be relevant to a contemporary audience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope that seeing these stories from 35 years ago offer interesting reflections on where we're at today. But I mean, basically, the main thing that I want is, I just hope that people still remain really gripped by the characters. I hope that maybe they're surprised by where the characters are heading. We're really trying to, not take the story in a predictable path. We don't want people to see where it's going. And more than anything, I just hope that they finish this series and they're satisfied and surprised, but they just want to know what will happen next, and they'll keep watching into a third series. That's my main hope.
That was going to be my next question. Is that simmering along, percolating somewhere, season 3?
It's actually much more than percolating. We're shooting it in January, so I've got 6 drafts, and the cast are soon to be reunited in Melbourne, and we're in the throes of it right now, which is really exciting.
And just, as we said at the beginning, seeing the reception, particularly in Australia, how does it feel to have just really caught the imaginations of people there?
It's been really delightful. I mean, so many aspects of it. And I have to say, particularly the fact that it's been so embraced by journalists of the era and journalists now. I didn't know how they would respond to it. I didn't know whether they would pick holes in it. I just didn't know how it would go. But they seem to have really embraced it and become big fans of it. And so we're all delighted, and I think we're a little bit surprised, because I don't know, part of us thought that this might be quite a niche show. These are very, we think of the characters as being quite idiosyncratic, not necessarily likable. And, this is a period piece and driven by all these ambitious characters, but people seem to get really involved in it. And I'm shocked at how often people stop me wanting to express their thoughts about the characters and where they should go and what should happen. But I'm thrilled by it. I love it.
Yeah, and I think everyone sort of has that thing of, perhaps we don't realize what goes into the news, and there's just something amazing about sort of, peeking behind the scenes and seeing, the mayhem that actually has to go on behind it.
Yeah. Well, it's so controlled on screen, but I think there is that electrifying element of, looking behind the curtain for sure.
And I think that's my time up. But, just very quickly, do you have other projects that you've kind of got, going on in the background, or is this your main focus for now?
This is my main focus for now. I have to say, it's so all-consuming, this one, because of all the research. Pretty much, as soon as we finished the second season, I began the research project for the third. Now we're shooting the third. So it has completely taken over my life. I wish I could say I had something else that I was immediately about to roll onto, but no, I'm still in the 1980s doing all of my research, but very happily so.
Brilliant. Well, I can't wait for everyone else to get stuck into season 2, and congratulations on it all, because it's, very binge worthy in the absolute positive sense of that.
Oh, terrific. That's great to hear. And I know that you get to binge it in the UK, which is I love that that's the way it rolls out there. Here it was a bit of a week by week proposition. So it's interesting that it works so well as a binge, and it's great to hear.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time. Really enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.